Hi everyone, Chris here from IELTSadvantage.com, and in this video we're going to look at the speaking test, and we're going to look at 10 key mistakes that might stop you getting a band 7 or above on your IELTS speaking test. So every single day of the week I do mock speaking tests with my students where I do a full mock test with them and then I give them immediate feedback. And the same things keep coming up again and again and again. So we tailor our advice exactly to what the students said and give them individual feedback. But there are a range of about 10 things that I say on a daily basis to my students who I do the mock tests with. So what I thought I would do in this video is share these 10 things with you. So you're probably not guilty of all of these 10 things, but even if you are doing a few of these key mistakes, it could stop you getting a 7 or above. And all of this advice will help you perform much better on test day in your speaking test. So let's start off with number 1. Relax. Alright, so one thing that I see with students, even in the mock speaking test, so not even the real test, is they come in and they're very tense, they're very stressed out, and they don't speak to me like a human being. They speak to me like a IELTS recording object or something just like a robot, an IELTS robot, just recording their response. So they're not really speaking to me in the same way that they would speak to their friends or their colleagues if they were just having a conversation. And what this means is two things. The way that they're speaking is very, very formal, which, it's not you shouldn't be using very, very informal language in the speaking test, but not really formal either. Think about how you speak to your classmates or your colleagues or your friends, how you would speak to them. So that sort of style of speaking. But more importantly, when you are relaxed and you're speaking to the examiner like a human being, your brain is just able to process everything far better, more efficiently. So if your brain is really stressed out and you're very rigid and you're worrying about everything and you're speaking to the examiner like an examiner, then everything is not going to work so well up here. But if you relax a little bit and just realize that the examiner wants you to do your best, wants you to speak to them like a human being, you'll do much better and you'll really stand out from the other students, because all the other students will be like, hello, my name is Chris, I am from Ireland. Like, people don't speak like that, all right? But if you go in and you just chat to the examiner and focus on clear communication, you're going to really, really stand out from the other candidates. Really, really important that you do relax in the test. I know it is a life-changing exam, but try to do that as much as you can. Number 2, part 1. So part 1 is about you. So part 1, you cannot get the questions wrong because they're asking about you. All right, so they're normal everyday questions about you. Things like your home, your job, your studies, your hometown, what you do in your free time, things like this. So what I see with a lot of students is they tend to overthink these answers, these part 1 answers, and they try and give very impressive answers. And really, you don't need to do that. Again, just speak to the examiner in a conversational way in the speaking test, especially for part 1. And you don't have to think of impressive ideas or anything because they are asking about you. You can't get the question wrong. And even if they ask you quite a strange question, just give them an honest answer and you'll be absolutely fine. Number 3, don't overthink it. This is probably the most common thing that I say to students after I do a mock speaking test with them. You're overthinking things. So what they do is they're thinking of so many things. They're thinking of ideas, vocabulary, grammar, their fluency, their pronunciation, so many things. And what this does is it lowers their fluency somewhat. So if you're thinking a lot, then your fluency tends to suffer. So instead of just answering the questions naturally, what they're doing is they're thinking of like, okay, what is a really good idea here? What does the examiner want to hear? How is my grammar? How is my vocabulary? If you overthink things, then it's not so good. When I get it through to students that they should answer the question naturally and don't try and think too much about it, then their performance, not only fluency, but their grammar and their vocabulary and their pronunciation just seems to flow much better when they do that. Some students get annoyed with me and say like, Chris, I have to think. What are you talking about? So I'm not talking. I'm not saying that you should not think at all in the test. What I'm saying is try not to overthink things, especially with ideas. Ideas are not as important in the speaking test as you think. So you must answer the question. You must develop your answer. But there are no extra marks for impressive ideas or anything like that. Just focus on clearly communicating with the examiner, and you'll be fine. So, number 4, grammatical range will take care of itself. So, another thing, and I don't see this as much as these other 3, but some students are guilty of this, normally down to just they've been told the wrong thing about what they need to do, or they've looked at the marking criteria and they've misinterpreted the marking criteria. So a lot of students are really focusing on showing how many different tenses and grammatical structures and all of those different things and complex sentences, without a real focus on communication. You're going to be asked a range of different questions. You're going to be asked about the past, the present, the future, how things have changed from the past to the present, how things will change in the future. You'll be asked your opinion about things, asked to discuss other people's opinion, to compare things, to contrast things. The questions themselves will require you naturally to use a range of different grammar structures and tenses and everything else. So if you just focus on answering the questions, and again this comes down to not overthinking things, the grammar structures will take care of themselves. Again, if you're thinking about all these complex grammar structures in your head, how do you think your fluency is going to be? Not so good. So focus more on grammar mistakes, on accuracy, making sure that you limit the number of mistakes that you can as much as possible. You are going to make grammar mistakes, everybody does, but try and limit them as much as possible, and don't think too much about the different grammar structures and tenses and things like that. Obviously do think about, what tense am I going to use or what structure am I going to use, but don't obsess over it and overthink it again. So number 5, don't stick rigidly to the part 2 bullet points. So part 2, the examiner is going to show you a cue card, and at the top they're going to ask you to talk about a certain topic. So I did a video the other day and the topic was talk about a beautiful place in your country or your hometown or something like that. There are lots and lots and lots of different topics that they might ask you about. But to help you, on the cue card they give you 4 bullet points. So they said you should talk about, and then the 4 bullet points. A mistake that I see students making is that they look at the bullet points and their whole talk is just bullet point number 1, then bullet point number 2, then bullet point number 3, then bullet point number 4. And what happens, 2 things happen. That's a very unnatural way to speak to anybody, reading bullet points and just regurgitating those things that that are on the cue card, or you might have made notes, head down, just reading what is on the paper. It's a very unnatural way to speak. The more important thing, or the bigger mistake that I see students making, is they get to bullet point number 4 and 30 seconds or a minute still to go, and they're kind of they're too reliant on those bullet points. So I'm not saying don't use the bullet points, but use the bullet points just to help you speak naturally. Don't rely on them and stick to them rigidly. And if you want to talk about something else related to the main topic, that's absolutely fine. You could give your opinion about it. You could talk about how it was in the past. You could talk about how it will change in the future. You could describe it. You could tell a personal story about it. You could talk about examples. There are many things that you could talk about related to that topic. So use the bullet points if you want, but don't stick to them absolutely rigidly, head down reading them, and then you run out of things to say, and it also affects your fluency as well. So practice using the bullet points to help you, but not to hinder you when you're practicing. Number 6, develop your part 3 answers. So this normally happens with some students that are at a very high level, so their grammar is great, their vocabulary is great, their pronunciation is great, and they get to part 3, and some of the part 3 questions might be a little bit more difficult than you anticipated, but the main mistake that I see is students just not developing their answers enough. So a lot of students have the capability to talk about the answers at length, but they just don't do that. and that will affect your fluency and coherence score if you don't develop your answers enough in part 3. And a really easy way to develop your answers is, and you don't have to use this for every question, you know, some questions you'll be able to just talk about naturally, but if you need a little bit of help developing your answers, think about answering the question. So think about that as like a topic sentence, explanation, explain why you think that or why other people think that. Examples, so you could use a personal story or just an example of something you've seen in a newspaper or a story on TV or YouTube or whatever, anything that you can talk about. And that is one point. And then you can go on to a second point or show a contrasting point. Explain that, give a personal example, a personal story, something like that. And that will really help you develop your part 3 answers. And don't worry if you get a really difficult question in part 3 of the speaking test. That is the examiner testing you, really trying to stretch your language ability. So if you get a really difficult question in part 3, you should be kind of happy. It shows that the examiner thinks that you are going to get quite a high band and is testing to see if you deserve that higher band. So always attempt the question, always try and answer it, always try and develop it in part 3. Number 7, communication is key. So the number one thing that IELTS wants you to demonstrate is, can you communicate using your mouth through speaking with the examiner? All right. One thing that they do not want you to demonstrate is how many impressive, big, long academic words that you know. All right. So vocabulary is important. It's 25% of your total mark. But what I see with a lot of students is they go in with the intention of just showing the examiner how many amazing words they know, rather than actually communicating, answering the question. All right, so do show the examiner that you have a range of vocabulary, but don't go in and be like, okay, try and think of a big academic word, say that word, and try and think of it again. That might sound like, you know, a silly example, but it does happen with a lot of students. Do not use vocabulary unless you know what it means. You know, I see a lot of students who memorize long lists of band 9 vocabulary. There's no such thing really, and then they just regurgitate it on test day. And really, it is good to show the examiner that you know some, you know vocabulary. But again, coming back to point number 4, the examiner is going to ask you a range of different questions on a range of different topics. You will naturally use a range of vocabulary just by talking about the different topics. So focus on answering the question, on clearly communicating with the examiner, and the vocabulary will look after itself to a certain extent. So, number 8, listen to mistakes. So this is before your test, way before your test, weeks and months. What happens is when you are speaking, often you do not hear the mistakes that you're making, pronunciation errors, vocabulary errors, grammatical errors especially. Even when I listen back to my videos, I'm like, oh, do I sound like that? Oh, I made this mistake. Everybody makes mistakes when they're speaking. But one really helpful thing that has helped my students a huge amount, and it's totally free, you can do it at home, is just get your phone, get a partner, or just get some practice speaking questions, and just ask yourself those questions, or get a partner to ask you those questions, and record your answers. Listen back. That's the most important thing you need to do. You will probably be amazed at how many little mistakes that you're making. Could be a grammar error, could be a pronunciation error, and just being aware of these mistakes is a huge thing. The first step to fixing your mistakes is becoming aware of them, and on the speaking test many students are not aware of these little mistakes, and these little mistakes can add up. Number 9, clarity is key. So the most important thing related to pronunciation is 25% of your mark, is clarity. In other words, can the examiner understand what you are saying? What it does not mean is, do you have a British accent, or do you have an American accent, or whatever accent. I don't have a British accent, I don't have an American accent, and I think I would do quite well on the IELTS speaking test. It is not about accent, it is about clarity, alright? Can the examiner understand what you are saying? Now, everybody has different pronunciation issues depending on your country or just individually, there could be some things that might not sound very clear to the examiner. If you're hoping to get, 7, 8, or even 9, the examiner has to understand absolutely everything that you say. So listen to your performance yourself, or get a really good teacher to help you out with that, to tell you, and certain countries have certain little pronunciation issues. Figure those out and fix them. There are other things that you need to do, like displaying that you can use intonation, sentence stress, word stress, chunking, all of these different things. But really for pronunciation, really focus on clarity. Number 10, so last but not least, do the hard work before the test. Do not go in sitting outside the test and you're like, oh my god, I haven't prepared anything, I'm not ready for this. If you do that, you're going to get very nervous, you're not going to be relaxed, and bad things could happen. Do the hard work, figure out what your mistakes are before the test, practice as much as possible, do a mock test with a teacher or by yourself at home, and that is really going to help you. Figure out why you might not be able to get the score that you need, fix those mistakes, practice until you're able to get to that level. So there's a few ways that you can practice at home. Just Google IELTS speaking questions, should come up. IDP, the British Council, IELTS.org, Cambridge English, these are really good sources for like speaking questions. Record yourself, do a full test, that's totally free, listen back, and that will really help you. If you are currently in an IELTS school or you have an English teacher, ask them to do like a little mock session with you and give you some feedback. If your teacher is like an IELTS examiner or an ex-examiner, they'll be able to give you very good advice on that. If they don't have any experience with IELTS, they'll be able to help you with your English. So pronunciation, how is that? Can they understand everything that you're saying? Grammar, vocabulary, fluency, how is that? Any English teacher will be able to help you with that. We also have a service, we have the mock speaking test service. So what we do is I meet you on Skype, I do a full test with you, and I give you instant feedback on your performance. I'll try and link that below the video if you want to do that, but there's also the other free options on the website. Go to IELTSadvantage.com/speaking, or just go to IELTSadvantage.com and you'll find lots and lots of speaking resources there. Thank you very much, guys. Hope that was helpful. Those are the most common mistakes that I see my students making. Let me know what you think of those. Do you make any of those mistakes yourself? How did you get around it? If you've already got the score that you needed, what did you do in the test to help you out? Give advice to other students. Thank you very much, guys. Go to IELTSadvantage.com if you need anything, and feel free to share, like, whatever you want to do with this video. See you again soon, guys. Bye bye.